addition to Mental Health Awareness Sunday, we are celebrating Pentecost, often referred to as the birthday of the church. Pentecost is a long-standing Jewish harvest party, and it is a Christian celebration as old as Jesus' church. It comes from the Greek word meaning 50th. That Pentecost moment described in the New Testament is a first-century event in Jerusalem where we read the words, it sounds like people's heads caught fire. At this event, an indoor windstorm swirled through a packed house party. Everyone was baffled, some were panicked, and all of a sudden, people became multilingual. It seems a bit of a bizarre story, but seeing what happened on the day of Pentecost within the narrative of the scripture makes it more clear. You see, Luke, the author of Acts, is a historian, not a news reporter. He tells us what happened by drafting a story that maps us into the Old Testament, the patterns and the themes. Think of all the times that the divine showed up in the form of a brilliant fire, and things don't burn up. Friends, this is the story that marks the beginning of a new world. Hear these words from Acts chapter 2. And join us in the bold part. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place.
And suddenly, from heaven, there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting.
Divided tongues as of fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them.
All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability.
Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem.
And at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear, each of us, in our own native language? In our own languages we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power."
All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another,
"What does this mean?"
But others sneered and said,
"They are filled with new wine."
But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them.
"People of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel.
In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters will prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams.
Even upon my servants, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. I will show portents in the heaven above, and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and smoky mist.
The sun shall be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood before the coming of the Lord's great and glorious day.
Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved."
May God add a blessing to our hearing and our understanding of these words. As we continue to explore what it means to be a wise congregation, one of us has volunteered to share her story, and I welcome Doretta this morning.
So first, I want to thank Julie and the choir for picking that anthem this morning. That's a poem I have from Julian of Norwich on a necklace that I have worn quite a bit and almost worn thin. So thank you for that. You may remember back in July of 2015, and no, I didn't remember the date either, I had to look it up. You may remember in July of 2015 when Tony Moreno leaped from the Aragoni Bridge in Middletown. Unfortunately, people jumping off this bridge is not uncommon. But what made the story stick out for me was that Tony was a father. And before he jumped into the river, he had thrown his own 7-month son in. While the father survived, his son did not. The next day, I was at work at a new job, overhearing those kind of conversations that take place over lunch, when I heard one of my colleagues take on a very disgusted tone. "Well, I cannot imagine ever doing such a thing to your own child." And suddenly, my blood ran cold. Not just because we were supposed to be an organization that cares about people, not because she was a leader in the organization, but because I could imagine it. And not just imagine it, I've lived it. I've lived through, as we said before, my own fearful groanings, where I truly believed that my child would be better off without me, where my husband and my family and my team at work would all be better off without me. Thoughts like I'm too weak to keep fighting every day, or too sick to be worth saving. I thought I was the only one, but as it turns out, I'm not. In 2020, at the height of COVID, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, she said, sweating profusely, standing up here in front of people, and a type of chronic depression called dysthymia. I have been the beneficial recipient of therapy, medication, diet, exercise, meditation, and journaling. It's a lot of work. It's a constant struggle, this keeping all things in balance, something akin to living inside of a gyroscope or spinning a dozen plates at once. There is no balance. It's a constant struggle, but it is possible. I've also benefited from the support of my loving husband and from good friends here in our church family, which is one of the reasons I was so excited to hear that Jim and Heather are talking about becoming a wise church, writing a pledge of support, learning about mental health, and how we can help those who come in our church doors looking for a safe space. We would welcome anyone wearing glasses to correct for poor vision, or for carrying their inhaler to treat their asthma, or nitroglycerin tablets against a possible heart attack. Why is helping someone with mental illness that different? Our church has a history of welcoming others. We are just about to celebrate 15 years of being an open and affirming congregation. We have taken a public stand against racism. So it makes sense to me that we continue this journey of inclusion and learn how to welcome people like me suffering from this group of misunderstood health issues. Today, if I were to overhear that same lunchroom conversation, I like to think I would have the courage to stand up to my colleague with gentleness, to say something in support of people like me who struggle every day, finding the courage to get out of bed and adult. I borrowed that from my daughter. Adult is now a verb. To quote Bobby Joe Valentine, there are many of us who were once told we were broken, and it stuck. I hope that others will join us as we become known as a wise church. Thank you.
Thank you, Doretta. That was brave and powerful, and I think spoke to every single one of us. I'd like to invite Jim and Heather to come forward, and we're going to have a conversation about our journey to become a wise congregation and what that means. Feels a little like a talk show, right? We're sitting on our stools and we can see all of you, and you can hopefully see all of us. few months ago, as I got to know this congregation and understand where we were and the struggles that we're facing, I asked these two, what can we do to better serve one another, to build a stronger community where we can be more vulnerable, where we can dismantle some of the negative perceptions around mental health. And together we've been exploring what it means to be wise, which is a designation within the United Church of Christ, meaning that we would be welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged, not just with our own community, but with the broader community around us as it relates to total person well-being. We're so lucky to have these two leading this effort. So what I'd like to know is, I think sometimes, and certainly for me as a layperson for many years before ministry was my profession, we struggle a little bit to connect what we do Monday through Friday with what happens here on Sunday. They almost feel like we live in two different worlds. But for each of you, being part of this is a connection to your profession. So maybe start, Jim, tell us what your role in the mental health system is.
Thanks, David. Also, Doretta, I just want to thank you for your testimony. It's a brave thing, and I think that's part of the message that we are trying to convey, is that I grew up in a family where we were not really allowed to talk about feelings very much. And I think early on in my life, I began to become a great observer of people, including my own experience. And so I've been a psychologist in this community for over 40 years. I had a leadership role at the Institute of Living in Hartford, which many of us are familiar with. And over the years, as I was working with my colleagues and patients and became very involved in training professionals, it became clear to me that we were really missing how important our early life experiences, kind of like we heard this morning, have given us certain rules about how to live in the world and how to live with others. And I've kind of devoted my life to helping people really come back to the fact that at our core, we were all born healthy and happy emotionally, and helping people kind of return to those moments where we can learn self-compassion first and then compassion for others, kind of just informed my life as a psychologist.
Thank you. Heather.
Yeah, so I am a nurse, and I worked mostly in community health and primary health. But a few years ago, I definitely knew that I wanted to specialize in psychiatric nursing, so I started taking classes at University of St. Joseph in West Hartford and graduated last year with my psychiatric nurse practitioner license. I also work at the Institute of Living, but it's interesting, like David said, that sometimes we're so separate. What we do Monday through Friday is so separate that I've known Jim and Sarah for years and didn't realize that both of them had their entire careers at the Institute of Living. I didn't even know what they did for a living until we started working in this initiative, and I pieced it all together. So it's obviously something that I'm passionate about, and I'm so proud of our church for moving forward in this direction.
Me too. So we're incredibly blessed to have your professional preparation leading this work, but I'm worried that it might give some of us the wrong impression. Does becoming a wise congregation mean that all of us have to be able to treat and diagnose? Heather.
No, that's a great question, and I'm glad that you brought it up. So first of all, our church, I think, is a little bit unusual in that the two people that are volunteering to lead this effort happen to work in the industry, but most of the churches who have done this, it's just been, people who in the congregation who are concerned or interested in the topic or who have experienced themselves with the mental health care system. So we're a little bit of an outlier on that. But no, of course, the idea is that all of us as lay people, as civilians who maybe don't work in the industry at all, we still have the desire and the ability to be compassionate and be welcoming to people from all walks of life with all sorts of struggles. And to me, it's a little bit like, our church is always, churches in general have always done a great job of really caring for people who have physical illnesses. And when somebody announces in church that they've been diagnosed with cancer or that they're having weird symptoms and they don't know what's going on, we don't respond by saying, oh, I'm not a doctor, don't talk to me about that, right? We typically just say, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through that, and I mean, we might, if they haven't seen a doctor, we might certainly encourage them to go do that, but in general, we just offer ourselves, and we may even say, I don't fully understand all of that, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, I care about you, we want to help support you through this, and that's the model. The other thing I was thinking about was that we have in our church office, we have an AED, an automated defibrillator in case somebody were to go into a cardiac arrest here. We're prepared for that, right? We don't want that to happen. Hopefully we will never need to use that, but we have the equipment available if we needed to do something after we call 911, right? We want to be prepared for things. And that's what this is about too, the recognition that people come to our church from all walks of life, experiencing all kinds of things, having all kinds of struggles, and we want to know how to handle that.
Jim, anything to add?
Yeah, one of the advantages of Heather and I being in the profession, and I know that there are many others in our group that work in the field, is that we can be a great resource. That some of us are very well connected to the community resources and specialists in the area, so one of the roles that I hope that we can do is to provide a resource and an information source for when in need, what do you do? And so that's another really important part of this mission.
So, Jim, I'm going to follow up with that. We definitely hear about access to mental health care being a challenge, and one of the contexts we hear that in is that there seems to be a pandemic around mental health right now, and we've been talking about it particularly since COVID. Can you help us make sense of that? What is happening right now?
It's a great question. I won't bore you with the statistics, but since 2020, the incidence of many forms of mental health struggles have increased well over 30%. I think the biggest issue from my experience is that we were forced without preparation to become a virtual world. And one of the issues that today is so important as a reminder is that we need each other and we need to be part of a community. And so I think a lot of the struggles that have increased over these years in part is related to the increased isolation and the use of computers as substitutes of being in person. And frankly, the number of anxieties that the mind can hold at once, I think is getting quite exceeded at this point in time. Between the environment issues, the violence in the world, the political tensions, et cetera. And so I just think that's all contributing to some of the issues that we're struggling with, and especially for kids and adolescents for whom their school years were disrupted. Really, we're still seeing some of the long-term consequences of that.
Heather, maybe add on to that a little bit, and I know you're a mom of a middle schooler and you've been a school nurse. Talk a little bit more about what you've noticed.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are, well aware of the confluence of events that have happened. The COVID pandemic was so disruptive. We've also had this astronomical rise in technology, kids having access to, phones and social media, which is, now the research is becoming clear how damaging that can be for kids. There have been a lot of disruptions in the things that kids and teenagers used to do. So Alexander's an only child, for example, and so we've always been very dependent on after-school clubs and baseball teams and all of those sorts of things. And there was a period of about, a couple of years really, where there was very little of that going on because of the pandemic. So kids were so isolated. I think we're still, experiencing the results of that. Schools have a recognition as well that all the technology, particularly cell phones and social media, can be detrimental depending on how they're used, but the schools haven't really figured out how to manage that or how to guide kids in that. So I think that those pieces have just turned into a real situation where there's a lot of kids really, really struggling. young kids and then teenagers, and then even the kids up in college who had their high school experience disrupted by COVID.
Thank you. So how do we think about mental health, how it impacts our lives today?
It's a great question. I think of mental health as being a mind-body issue or a mind-body problem. When we are struggling with stress and tension, our bodies get involved. It impacts our physical well-being. And because I think we've become so reliant on solving our emotional issues privately and individually, it's becoming increasingly important to reform these community resources. So for me, every part of our lives is really touched by our mental well-being. And I really like to think about it as mental, psychological and emotional wellness as opposed to mental health, because I think that focuses primarily a little bit too much on the mind. What we say to ourselves impacts our physical health. Our physical health impacts how we feel about our emotional well-being. So as I was reading in preparation for today, I was reminded that Jesus became a human, became into a body. And so by definition, our bodies are also carry the aspect of God and the Spirit. So being able to take care of our physical well-being and our mental well-being, as well as our spiritual well-being, I think is a critical issue.
I'm going to pivot off of that, change up our order just a little bit, because I like what you're saying there about spiritual care and mental health. Heather, how do you think about the connection between caring for our spirits as well as caring for our overall and mental well-being?
Yeah, that's a rich question, and certainly we could have a lot to say about that. One thing, like Jim said, we're all one thing. I mean, we have our body, we have our mind, we have our spirit. Those all go together. They're not separate things, right? So to some extent, I really believe that spiritual care is emotional care. Spiritual care is mental health care. That's part of what makes us human beings. There was a article recently in the Wall Street Journal that it was the results of a survey which showed that people who engage in what they called active religious activity report better psychological health, better psychiatric health than people who don't. And by active, they basically meant going to church or synagogue or mosque. So it's different from saying, there's a lot of people who will say, well, I'm a spiritual person, but it's just a solo thing. I don't really talk to anybody else about it. I don't go to church or anything. That probably has value too. But this particular study was talking about people who are actively engaged with a faith community. And, faith communities, churches offer a great deal that supports mental health. One of them being the value of community, having people that you know, having people that you can call, text, talk to, that's enormous. Being part of something larger than yourself is huge. As you heard the announcements this morning and Ruth referenced, we have so many different volunteer activities and things that we do here, all these different ministry teams. So when people are passionate about something, whether it's the environment or music or racial justice or kids and faith formation, people have the opportunity to be part of something that's important to them, that's bigger than them, which we know is incredibly important to mental wellness. So I think that's a huge piece of it, and I could go on, but I will let Jim talk as well.
I want to go back. Heather and Jim and I met with another church who had recently been through the WISE process. And now, certainly no one in this church would voice this concern, but she relayed to us that some in the congregation said, hey, are we going to become the crazy church if we do this? How might we think about that kind of a concern? Who wants it?
Aren't we already? I love it.
Hilaire, I was just going to say that all of us are crazy in some way, and so it's just a matter of being welcoming and supporting, because one of the things we know from reading all of the awful things that we can read about in the paper is Why didn't that person reach out to somebody, to tell somebody that they were struggling? And so if one of those, quote, crazy individuals that somebody can be labeled as such is able to come to one of us and just let us know that they're struggling, that can be a huge support and lead them down a very different path than they might have previously. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Thank you. You know, I'm going to just, move us along just a little bit. The miracle of Pentecost, as you heard in the story, was that all of these people from different cultures and with different backgrounds and with different languages were able to understand one another. That's the beauty of Pentecost. So, Heather, how can we better hear and understand each other and build a WISE program that addresses the needs of our community?
So, as a WISE team, we knew that before we jumped into any initiatives or programs or started scheduling things, we needed to get a handle on what are the needs of the church. Because people struggle with all kinds of things, from significant mental illness to grief to loss to caregiver stress. So the WISE team has actually put together a survey. It's our first step towards moving forward. And our ushers are actually going to be handing that out right now. And you are welcome to either fill it out while you're sitting here or take it home and give it some thought. It looks long. It's like 4 pages long, but it's all check boxes. So it won't take you any more than a couple of minutes to fill it out. Don't put your name on it. If you do decide to fill it out today or during coffee hour or something, you can fold it up and drop it in our beautiful steeple that Steph Hennigan made for us. We're repurposing the steeple for this. You can also, of course, hand it to me, hand it to David. We're gonna compile these. If you prefer not to do it on paper, we are working on a digital version, which should go out in the weekly e-news today, and you can take it. We want to make sure that the initiatives that we take on, I hope I have enough, but if not, we'll catch everybody later. We want to make sure that the initiatives that we're taking on are relevant. We want to make sure that we spend our time and our power on things that are going to meet the needs of this congregation. And every congregation is really different, and we've heard from several. Jim, I don't know if you have examples of some of the things that other WISE churches have taken on.
Yeah, it's a wide menu, and the beauty of it is for us that we can, as we move forward, figure out what we specifically would like to do. Support groups for both kids and adolescents, for adults, to deal with a variety of issues. Weekly meetings, book clubs that focus on this interaction between spirituality and mental wellness are just a couple of examples around that. The importance of the survey also, I want to let you know, is that from the results, the next step will be for us to work on our covenant, which is part of the certification process, where we draft a covenant that really reflects our specific and unique goals as part of our WISE mission. So it really is important that you let us know kind of what's on your minds and what backgrounds you have and what you can offer as well. So I think that's an important part of the survey.
I am so incredibly grateful to these two for sharing, and for Doretta, for sharing this morning, for pulling together what it means and a little bit of that vision of becoming a WISE congregation. Can we thank them? Thank you both. Friends, let us be called to an attitude and spirit of prayer.